Hi, we're filming from the Akolade event here in Melbourne, and I'm joined by Leanne Emerson from Dementia Australia. So thanks for joining us, Leanne.
Pleasure.
Leanne, there's a lot that's been happening with the Royal Commission and I guess looking at solutions to be more proactive and in particular the way that we care for people living with dementia. What are some of the things that we could start looking at to put in place now rather than waiting to the findings in 18 months' time?
Yeah, look, I think while the Royal Commission is a really good opportunity to elevate the conversation about quality care generally, but particularly around dementia, the sort of things that are coming out through the Commission aren't new problems. You know, we're hearing about things like inappropriate use of physical and chemical restraint, the overuse of psychotropic medication, consumers not being involved enough in planning for their care. And in the case of dementia, the informal carers not having the voice that they need in that conversation as well. But we've known about this stuff for a long, long time, right? And so, you know, the question I think we need to ask ourselves is why more isn't happening in terms of putting what we know to be best practice into practice. And I think one of the really significant issues in that regard is workforce training. So right now we have no minimum requirements for staff who work with people with dementia to be trained to do so. And so while I think generally speaking our staff across the sector want to do the best for the people they care for, without any specialist training, they simply don't know how to do that. So I think, you know, one of the most important issues that we hope will come out of the Royal Commission is to address that gap. I mean, there's no other disease that we deal with as a society that doesn't have some kind of specialist support or training behind it. And that's what I think we need.
And I mean, as you say, people working in the sector have known about many of these issues, and reports and things have showed that there are some deficits and there are challenges, issues. Consumers have told us this. So what is the barriers to actually making change, and where can we start?
Look, I do think knowledge is a big part of it. And look, to give you an example, we know that more than 50% of people living in residential care are on psychotropic medication. But the evidence suggests that only 20% of those people get any benefit from the medication. And so I think what's missing, therefore, is the knowledge around what are the alternatives. You know, if someone's experiencing some behaviour that is challenging to deal with, how do you assess that? How do you get to the root cause of it? You know, what are some non-pharmacological approaches you can take to that? And I think that's just about knowledge and education. I think equally, though, if we took an approach that put people with dementia at the heart of the service development, you know, so we don't do to people, we do with people. A lot of those solutions would be born out of those kinds of conversations with people with dementia and their families. You know, they know, they've been dealing with this for years before they enter residential care. Quite often they know what the solutions are, they're just not invited to participate in the conversation.
I think a lot of the things and what have come out from, you know, what staff have said or the nurses union talk about the staff ratios and time. You know, a lot of these alternative therapies or alternative solutions to medication take a lot of staff resources and time. How do we overcome this? We don't just have a huge bucket of money to throw in for staff. So how do we...
Yeah, look, I think the whole conversation around staff ratios is interesting because I think there's no doubt we need more staff. But that's not the golden bullet, right? I mean, we can have more staff who know nothing about dementia, and that doesn't help us achieve the outcome that we want. So I think oftentimes it's a bit of a misnomer that providing those sort of interventions, the non-pharmacological ones, take more time. I think what they take is more expertise. And if we can train our staff in how to do that, I think in the longer term they're more efficient solutions, even if it means a little bit of investment in time initially to understand what's going on, you know, put in place the right solution and you save staff time, you know, moving forward.
How big of an issue is the societal values around the way we perceive people living with dementia impacting things?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting question. Right now there's just shy of 500,000 people living with dementia in Australia, and by 2056 that'll rise to just over 1.1 million people. And in fact, 1 in 3 of us here will have dementia at some point in our lives, right? So it's a much more fundamental societal issue than probably what most people realise. But I think it's kind of caught up in Well, as one of our consumers said to us recently, most people know a bit about dementia, but it's half right and it's half wrong. And so, they bring to the conversation some misnomers. And the experience that people with dementia then have is to be isolated, to be excluded, to not have access to the same types of services. And so that whole societal awareness and understanding about dementia, I think, really leads to an unintentional discrimination, and I think that's what we see then play out in aged care, healthcare, and other parts of our system.
Look, thank you so much for your time today. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you.